This video is going to be quite different to what I normally upload, because what started off as a fairly standard factual video idea soon morphed into something more conceptual. You see, I want to take you, the viewer, on a journey of discovery and mystery solving as I piece together the clues and try to find out about the life of this fascinating man. So if you like family history or mystery solving or just want to learn about someone in the past, then this is a video for you. By the way, if you're wondering what this is all about, well, it's the Rugby League World Cup this year, hopefully, if COVID doesn't get in the way, and I really like the vintage style shirts, but I couldn't find one for England Rugby League, so I bought an England Union one from the market for £5 because I'm a huge scrounger, and I've surreptitiously covered up the English rose and will be covering it with an England League patch. But anyway, this whole story starts a few days ago when someone commented on one of my videos linking me to a Reddit thread which discussed this guy, Jim Davies. Now imagine playing 265 games as a professional rugby league player for Huddersfield, then going on to represent Yorkshire, Wales and Great Britain, then becoming the first Welshman to score over 200 points in a single season, only to then vanish from history. And I don't mean that he went for a walk one day and was never seen again. I mean that genuinely, after a certain year, he disappears from all records. We don't even know when or where he died. Now, when I started reading about this, I was captivated. I was really struck by the frustrating irony that someone who'd achieved so much in their life as a sportsman was not even granted the basic human dignity of a burial site which we know of. And so I became obsessed with finding out as much about this person as I could and hopefully solving the mystery of what happened to him. I wanted to give this man closure. I wanted to create a bookend for his life, a finishing point for his story. And so this video is an account of that journey. Now, what was both fortunate and unfortunate was that Jim lived in perhaps the most well-documented era to date. On the one hand, I was able to access so many fascinating newspaper clippings and photographs, but only from a certain period. And again, after that, he vanished. So that's another frustrating irony in his story. There was also the problem that the names Jim and Davies are two of the most common in Wales. If you've spent any amount of time in Wales, you'll notice that basically everyone is called Davies, Williams or Jones, which means there was a lot of records and articles I found, but which I couldn't prove were talking about Jim Davies. So this video was originally going to be much longer than it is now, but I've cut it down to the bits which I can conclusively feel are relating to our Jim Davies. Before I start, I'd like to thank the Reddit user who kickstarted my research by providing the two documents which I'm going to show you now. The first is a newspaper clipping from October 1919, and it reads, "Trevor Davies, who has been invited to assist Swansea against Cardiff on Saturday, is a brother of Jim Davies, the once famous all-white centre who migrated to Huddersfield." Now, I'm pretty certain this is talking about our Jim Davies, because I can't imagine there being another Welshman who also played for Yorkshire and Huddersfield called Jim Davies. But more importantly, it gives us the name of a relative, his brother Trevor Davies. And from that key piece of info, we can leapfrog onto this 1891 census, which shows James J. Davies, born 1883, with Trevor Davies as a brother. Again, I'm pretty confident about this document because his birthday is confirmed later on with other newspaper clippings. So from then on, we get scattered breadcrumbs of information, and it was difficult to put it in a chronological order, so just imagine this as a series of lost-style time jumps. Now I want to move on to this clipping from November 1915 because there's so much to unpack here and it's really exciting. Jim Davies home on furlough. After spending 4 months at the front with a rifle brigade, Sergeant Jim Davies, the ex-Swansea and Huddersfield footballer, arrived home for a few days' leave during the early hours of Sunday morning. This is not Jim's first experience of war, for he served in South Africa. As a rugby player, he gained distinction with Swansea in their Palmy days. then goes on to list other players. He went to Huddersfield and was for years regarded as being the best outside half in the Northern Union. Now this is amazing. For a start, he was in the First World War. There were so many rugby players of both codes who served in the First World War, so Jim is just another one of them. But more exciting, he was actually in South Africa before the First World War. Just imagine all of the stories which could be told from those two periods of his life. Now, as you'll find as you go on in this video, it's very, very difficult to find out any more details, so we've got to make do with the nuggets that we're given. But moving on, in Swansea and Huddersfield, he's regarded very highly as a player, and so far as to say the best outside half in the Northern Union. Like, that's high praise. Context, the Northern Union split from the Rugby Football Union in 1895 to form what basically became Rugby League, and I cover this in my 1895 video. So moving on to this clipping from December 1916, on Christmas leave. Among the large number of Swansea soldiers home on Christmas leave are Quartermaster Sergeant Major Jim Davies, the ex-All-White and Huddersfield rugby player who holds a military medal. Again, this is amazing. This tiny little clipping tells us so much. For a start, he's been given a promotion, but more importantly, he's won the military medal. Again, I couldn't find a citation for this, and I'd really love to know what act of bravery or selflessness he did to be awarded it. But think of the stories associated with it. This is another fascinating aspect of his life. Okay, so going back to September 1916, we find this article, and bear with me on this one, there's a lot to unpack here. It's really exciting. Former All-White Jim Davies gains a military medal and promotion. Jim Davies, the former All-White rugby player who went north in 1905, has been awarded the military medal and promoted Company Sergeant Major. The news is sent by Sergeant Ray Shefford, who in a letter home says that Davies, on returning to his unit after recovery at the base from a slight wound, was informed of the honours his distinguished conduct in action had gained for him. Jim Davies played a brilliant game for Swansea during their invincible season, 1904-05, towards the end of which he went north. He gained his Yorkshire cap in 1906 and Welsh national honours the following year. He was a member of the Northern Union team that had such a successful tour in Australia in 1910. Company Sergeant Major Davies, whose home is in Croft Street, Swansea, has been in active service for 14 months. He was an old volunteer, having served in the South African War. He speedily attained the rank of sergeant and was appointed physical instructor to the battalion to which he belonged. Okay, so there's a lot here to unpack, so let's go through it bit by bit. One of the most important things it tells us is when he went north. One of the fascinating things about rugby league history is just how much of it is made by Welshmen. You see, up until the 1990s, rugby union in Wales was amateur, meaning you weren't allowed to be paid for it. Whereas rugby league in the north was professional, so players were paid for playing. And this meant that, especially during times of economic difficulty, many Welsh players switched codes and went north to play rugby league professionally. However, this was deeply unpopular in Wales, and the players who did this were seen as betraying rugby union. They were often persecuted, and that's not an exaggeration. If you look at this clipping from 1905, this demonstrates exactly what I'm talking about. So this is from August 1905. Look at the way it's described Dan Rees' refusal to go north. A decision which has been heartily welcomed by all followers of the game in Wales. Now look at how he's describing Jim Davies. The player who has succumbed to the wiles of the enemy is Jim Davies, a young and promising three-quarter. They're hardly being unbiased, are they? Again, this is another fascinating story I want to know. We're not told why Jim Davies went north. So what was going on in his life which made him want to leave everything behind, move to a different country, move to a town in the north of England which he'd probably never been to or even heard of before, and play rugby league? Again, it's another mystery which frustratingly we're not given the answers to. We're also told that he first played for Yorkshire in 1906 and for Wales in 1907 and was part of the highly successful 1910 Great Britain team which toured Australia and won all 13 of their games, which is pretty impressive if you ask me. We also get a nice little bit of information about his military life. Here he is a company sergeant major, having served for 14 months and was a volunteer in the South African War. There were quite a few conflicts in South Africa going on at the time, so it's difficult to say which one it is. It could possibly be the Second Boer War, which ended in 1902 when Jim was 19, but ultimately we don't know, and we probably never will. We also find out that he was recovering from a slight injury, and again, this is another fascinating story which needs to be told. What scars would the experience of the First World War have left on him, both physically and mentally? What did he experience in the war and then bring back with him? We get a little bit more information about this wound in August 1916. News is to hand that Sergeant Jim Davies, the Huddersfield standoff halfback, has been wounded during the recent fighting in France. The nature of the wound has not transpired, but it is said that Davies is progressing favourably. His many admirers will wish him a speedy recovery. Now, so often with things like this, we're only given little nuggets of information, but we've got to chew on them to get to the real gold dust. Jim is wounded in August 1916. Now, in a later clipping, it mentions him being in the 10th Battalion, so I look at the details of it, and they were involved in the Battle of Delville Wood between July and September 1916. Now, if you know about World War I, the date September or July 1916 should be ringing a few bells. It's a Battle of the Somme. The Battle of Delville Wood was a part of the Battle of the Somme, and obviously there's no way of knowing if Jim was actually involved in this. He might have just had an accident somewhere. But the implication is that he got the wound whilst fighting, and considering that the dates of the Battle of Delville Wood, which was between July and September 1916, line up with the date of his injury, it is highly likely, I think, that he was involved in this battle. Again, that's another fascinating story which needs to be told. Okay, so I want to go back to 1914 for a little bit. This tiny little clipping from September 1914 is really moving. A great send-off. The 3:35 train to London on Monday afternoon carried a large batch of recruits to Cardiff and London. Skip forward a bit. Jim Davies, the ex-Swansea footballer, now of Huddersfield, left with the 8:30 train this morning for Winchester. Now, it's such a simple clipping, it's not really that exciting, but to me it's incredibly emotional. I'm imagining a train filled with hundreds of young men. They're about to leave, they're waving goodbye to their loved ones, they're filled with the excitement of going off to war. This is very, very early stages of World War I, so everyone's positive, excited, even the title says a great send-off. So there's this incredibly emotional scene I'm picturing, obviously filled with the tragedy of the fact that many of these young men would not be coming home, or would be coming home severely scarred mentally and physically. If you go back to a month before this, August 1914, we get an even sadder story. Late Mr. Owen Jones. The mortal remains of the late Mr. Owen Jones, aged 3, Bennett Street, were laid to rest at Coomgelly Cemetery on Tuesday afternoon. It then gives us a list of those in attendance, including Mr. Jim Davies, Huddersfield Rugby Football Club. The chief mourners included the parents, brothers and sisters and other relatives. Now, this, again, is incredibly moving to me because Jim is at the funeral of a 3-year-old child. But not just that, he's about to go to war in just a few weeks. So he's burying a child before going to war himself. Now, I wasn't able to find out who this Owen Jones was, but I think the implication there in the article is that it was a relative of Jim. It says that the chief mourners included the parents, brothers and sisters and other relatives, so this might have been a family member. And to bury a child related to you, I think, is a really soul-destroying thing, especially when he's in the knowledge that in a month's time he's going to be going to war himself. So this, again, is an incredibly emotive snapshot of his life. Okay, so to cheer everything back up again, in October 1914 we get this really sweet story, and I just really love this. Swansea's rugby traditions, how the local recruits at Blackdown are upholding them. A few days ago, the Swansea boys with the 10th Service Battalion Rifle Brigade, stationed at Dettington Barracks, Blackdown, Farnborough, Hampshire, were forwarded an set of football jerseys by Mr Tom Barfoot, an appeal having been made for them by Pendragon. On Thursday morning, the following letter reached the leader office from Mr Jim Davies, the ex-Swansea and Huddersfield three-quarter. Dear Pendragon, on behalf of the Swansea boys at Blackdown, I beg to acknowledge the receipt of 15 white jerseys, very kindly provided by Mr Tom Barfoot. We have arranged a series of matches, and it will be much better to play in the famous old colours than to sport our regimental shirts, which we have had to do up to now. A trial match for Saturday is fixed up, and the following week we expect to play the Camerons, when the boys hope to show them how rugby should be played. Soccer being the predominant code here, we will do our best to uphold the reputation of the Swansea Rugby Club. Again, thanking you for your kindness, which is very much appreciated here. I remain, yours sincerely, Corporal Davies. So this story is really sweet because fundamentally it's just about a group of lads having fun. Here's a group of lads at the barracks before they ship out to France, and they just want to play a game of rugby and wear proper rugby shirts. There's something just so sweet about the story and how it provides a snapshot of ordinary life for soldiers before they went to France. I think it's also very touching as well that these are probably the only words of Jim which have been preserved and are accessible to us. Like, we're hearing Jim speak, we're imagining his voice and what kind of person he comes across. So this is really a very touching article, I think. This is also where we get confirmation that he's in the 10th Service Battalion Rifle Brigade, which I then used to determine what battle he might have been wounded in. So we move finally into the post-war period, and we're getting close to our goal. I apologise if I've rambled during the First World War bit. I just found the whole period so fascinating and with so many stories about his life to tell. So in 1922 we get this clipping which tells us that he's become the coach of the Keighley Rugby League Club, which is now the Keighley Cougars. It pretty much says what it does on the tin. It also confirms his age. It says that he's 39, which again proves that he was born in 1883. There's a couple of clippings throughout this period which basically say that he's doing a great job in leading Keighley onto victory and that everyone loves what he's doing. Interestingly, in this period we also get quite a few clippings of people reminiscing about when he was a player, saying basically these were the good old days, he was part of the golden generation, I wish I could go back in time to see him play again, which I think really says a lot about how popular and well loved he was in the local community. And that's it. It stops. All of a sudden, 1937 is the last year which he appears in the records which I could find. There's no reason given, there's no explanation, but a long story short, I can't find anything else after 1937. No death certificate, no burial record, no farewell letter in a local newspaper. This is a moment when he really just fades away. And having come all this way and gone on this massive journey and really gotten quite a connection to this man, it all feels incredibly sad. It's like an imperfect cadence in music when someone finishes on a chord which doesn't actually wrap up the song, so it's left hanging and you're desperately frustrated and want it to just close satisfyingly, but it doesn't. And I know this is quite an unsatisfying ending for the viewer because I didn't solve the mystery. But sometimes, as a historian, things are like that. Sometimes we've got to accept that we may never know some things. We simply don't have the evidence or the records. And this is one of them. It's such a tragedy because he led such an exciting life, from South Africa to the battlefields of France to being a rugby star. There are so many stories which he could tell, but which sadly I can't now. This project consumed me. I was basically obsessed with finding out as much as I could. I felt like I had scoured every database, every newspaper archive, but ultimately failed in my mission. But on the other hand, what I feel most proud of is the fact that I have made his life story known now. I have dug out these little nuggets, which now you know. And I think the thing which moves me most is the knowledge that he does have living relatives. He may not have had children, but he had a family and he has living descendants. And I would really love it for them to find out that he is their ancestor, and to find out that someone had gone to the effort and dedicated their own time to discovering his story and making it public for thousands of people online. That would really warm the cockles of my heart. I feel this video has gone on for so long now that probably very few of you are still paying attention or watching. So I'm going to end it here. I really enjoyed finding out about this man and piecing together the clues of his life. I really hope that you've learnt something new. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon.